So I'll tell you a little bit about the project we've been working on the surveillance of climate-smart agriculture for nutrition. And this is a collaboration between the World Agroforestry Center, LSHTM, and the University of Cape Town. So everyone's here today because we're really working on that nexus of agriculture and nutrition and the pathways that link them. And as everyone in the room knows, this is no easy task. We also have the health environment, which influences nutrition, and all of this interacts with agriculture to produce this complex agriculture, nutrition, and health nexus. But we live in a changing world, and the climate is changing, and this also influences agricultural production, the health environment, food systems, and the like. Over the next few days, we're going to be really deconstructing, and everyone's going to be telling us about their pieces of this incredibly complex system between climate, agriculture, nutrition, and health. But one thing that makes this extra complicated is, well, how do we measure any of this? How do we collect data on such a complex system when everything's interacting and moving? And that's where our IMMANA project comes in. So the surveillance of climate-smart agriculture for nutrition is really an attempt to improve our ability to monitor these complex climate, ag, and nutrition linkages by innovating in a few different ways. We're innovating on what kinds of data are collected, how that data is collected, stored, and analyzed, and ultimately innovating on why we collect data in the first place and making that data useful. So I'll walk you through some of the things we're doing in each of these areas. First, what kind of data are we collecting? So what we're working on here is a project called the Rural Household Multi-Indicator Survey, or ROMIS for short, and we're collaborating with ILRI here. So this is an attempt to create a standardized set of indicators that can be taken on a household in less than an hour, so quick and easy, but actually captures the complexity of climate, ag, nutrition, and the household level factors. So some of the things that we measure are climate change observations, greenhouse gas emissions, agricultural productivity, market orientation, income diversification, things like this. Nutrition, we're measuring dietary diversity, food insecurity, and also wash and sanitation behaviors. And also household level processes like gender and decision making or poverty. And so the set of indicators lets you get a pretty complete picture of these climate, ag, nutrition linkages in a really digestible, modular, kind of quick way. And so through the IMMANA project, we've implemented this in 2 countries, in Kenya and in Zambia, but it's been implemented in 12 countries around the world, and so that data can all talk to each other because it's collected in a standardized way. And what we find, we've been working in Zambia, is that you can actually see how the health environment, so in this case, the wash behaviors change between beneficiaries of a food and nutrition security project and non-beneficiaries. So we can start to actually see differences from the research and the development projects that we're doing through this tool. So once we've collected data, there's the what data you collect, but there's also how you collect it. So here we've been working in collaboration with WFP, so they're in the back if you went to the data dive today. We've been working on innovative ICT methods for collecting data. So this is an example in Kenya where we were using live operator calls to mobile phones called Katie. So our operators are calling participants in the field and we're collecting nutrition data through mobile phone calls. It's quick, it's easy, but it also changes the data that you take. Right? So we found that for women's dietary diversity, the data we collect through traditional household surveys and through the mobile phone surveys is the same. But when we look at infant and young child feeding practices, so minimum acceptable diet, minimum dietary diversity, and minimum meal frequency to the left or to the right over there, we actually see a bias towards better nutrition scores when we collect data through mobile phones. Right? So how you collect data can also influence how or what you're finding, right, can influence the data that's collected. If you want to hear more about this, there's a poster tomorrow, and we're happy to talk to you ad nauseum about mobile phone data collection. Through our colleagues at Cape Town, we're also looking at interactive voice response for measuring dietary diversity. So in any context, you have local foods, and people are speaking local languages, and so through the University of Cape Town, we're creating data banks, word banks in 9 different African languages of over 100 words for foods that creates a data bank so that users can actually call in and tell what they're taught, what they're eating. So this works for low literacy users in underserved languages. So a way of mobile data collection that doesn't rely on literacy. We're also looking at feedback and incentives for participating in surveys. So how do things like incentives decrease survey attrition, particularly when you have longitudinal surveys? So we're looking at both monetary and non-monetary incentives for participating in data collection. So those are some of the innovations on how we're collecting data. Then we can also think about what we do with that data, especially in this complex system. So the climate, ag, and nutrition indicators are really complex, and there's multiple dimensions going on in any one of those systems. So typically what people have been doing and what a number of the IMMANA projects are doing is trying to develop these multidimensional indicators where you can essentially get one number that packs a lot of information about that system into that number. But that one number also loses some of the diversity of the data that's behind it. So we're sort of innovating in the other direction. So imagine you have 2 different outcomes. Maybe one's a nutrition, one's a health outcome, and you have a population. Now, when you do some kind of intervention or development project, the whole population might get better, right? So the outcomes improve in both of those dimensions. And that gives you also a change in the indicators, right? We can imagine the same population. We do our nutrition intervention, but we only get increase in some participants. Not everyone increases uniformly, right? So here we have a change in our indicators, but also a change in the diversity of nutrition outcomes in our population, right? So not everyone has changed, but only some have. Or you can imagine a scenario where you get increasing diversity of your outcomes after an intervention. So here the indicators don't change, but the diversity of outcomes in your population that you're working with does change. So this kind of an approach where we're actually looking at the full data set in multiple dimensions at the same time is an approach called hypervolumes. And so we're able to combine data, quantitative data, on all the different outcomes or things that we're measuring, say, in multiple dimensions from an agriculture, nutrition, and health perspective to look at the full diversity of how an intervention is changing a population. We could look at men and women, beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, youth and older populations, and so on. And it really gives you this multidimensional picture of what's going on. And finally, we're trying to innovate a little bit on why we collect data in the first place. Data is great. I love data. But data really works best when it's working for something, right? So here we're really working with partners on innovating on how data is collected in the field. So we've already mentioned our partnership with the World Food Program and their Mobile Vulnerability Analysis and Mapping Unit. So the information that we've learned on how mobile phone calls changes data is now getting rolled out in a few different countries across Africa and the world. So improving the way that dietary diversity and other nutrition data is collected. Through GIZ Care and CRS in Southern Africa and in Zambia, the rural household multi-indicator is now the way that they're going to be monitoring the impact of a development project on food and nutrition security. So that's a really exciting partnership there. And we're also collaborating with Human Network International in DRC to look at using that interactive voice response technology in the local African languages to improve our ability to monitor dietary diversity and nutrition in Congo. So hopefully I've given you just a little snapshot, a little taste of how innovations in what data is collected, how that data is collected, and ultimately why that data is collected can help us to actually achieve these resilient, nutrition-sensitive, resilient food systems through better research, programming, and policies. So thank you so much.